Water is a precious resource which many people may take for granted. But to get water to South County, water travels through pipes hundreds of miles from the Colorado River and Northern California, and it goes through treatment plants to ensure high quality of drinking water, and it costs less than a penny a gallon. May is Water Awareness Month. Good evening. You're listening to Collage, a weekly public affairs show on FM 88.5 KSBR. I'm Dawn Kamber. Our guests are from the Santa Margarita Water District. We have General Manager Dan Ferons, Chief Engineer Dawn Bunts, and joining us is KSBR Air Talent Garrison West. Well, Dan, please give us an overview of water in South County.
Thanks, Dawn. As you mentioned, the water for 90% of our water supply comes from 200 to 400 miles away and is treated at a treatment plant in Yorba Linda and then is directed to us through a couple of pipelines that are 25 miles long. So water is very precious down in South Orange County. It's hard for us to get, and reliability is very important. So when we get that water, we want to make sure we use it as many times as we can. So in South County, we not only have our domestic water system, but we recycle the water and use it for irrigation. We collect urban runoff and use that for irrigation. And we attempt to maximize the local supplies that we do have.
So explain how we have different water districts in South County to supply the different cities.
Water districts were formed based primarily in the 50s and 60s based on where land was owned, and landowners formed the water districts before the cities were here, and they were formed based on property ownership. So we ended up with kind of an overall blanket, but the water districts work very closely together. And in South Orange County in particular, we have 9-10 agencies, and we share joint facilities, joint planning. We work closely together to maximize the resources that we do have.
So explain how we're able to reuse water.
Water reuse comes in a couple of different ways. Anytime that water goes down the drain into the sewer system, we collect it and we treat that water, and it can be treated to a standard to release it out to the ocean, or it can be highly treated for reuse for irrigation purposes. In our building at Santa Margarita Water District, we have it plumbed to use that water to flush the toilets. So there's a lot of uses for recycled water. The other reuse is urban return flows, we call them, and that is when runoff is collected, we run it through wetlands treatment process, and we add that water to the irrigation mix also. So we want to try to use the water 3 or 4 times before we lose it to the environment.
And Dawn, understand that the district is working on a project to try to reuse most of the water.
We're maximizing the treatment capacity at our treatment plants so that we can inject potentially 90% of the water that's treated back into the irrigation systems.
So how are you able to do that?
Through more extensive treatment, construction of filtration facilities that go with that water, and then also the extension of pipelines to serve it to areas that can use the recycled water.
Now, what's the issue of runoff water impacting what you do?
Because we have a separate sewer and storm drain system, we don't have direct impacts necessarily. The runoff water we try to capture and blend in with our recycled water, as opposed to the East Coast where the stormwater actually runs in with the sewers and they have a problem because of the volumes.
Now, Dan, I know you have a great relationship with your users. You try to educate them on what they can do to conserve water, but I'd like you to give us all an education on that.
Water conservation is our best and least expensive source of new water. So for every drop of water that we can convince a customer not to use by smart irrigation practices, putting in the low-flow toilets in the houses and the low-flow devices in the houses, is water that we're not importing and we can use for somebody else. It helps the reliability with conservation. So we work closely with the homeowners associations in particular right now. We're emphasizing that this upcoming year to maximize their irrigation practices to what's the demand the plants have for water. And if we can get the HOAs to match those demands, we can really reduce overall irrigation, especially in the domestic water. but it also applies to homeowners too. We have programs for rebates. You can get rebates, so you can put a smart controller in. A smart controller sends a message to your sprinklers telling them when you actually need to irrigate, as opposed to a lot of folks who, when it rains, they forget to turn off their sprinklers. Or during the winter, we've had a dry winter, but a lot of folks have turned off their irrigation and not turned it back on. The summer, that's going to catch up to them. So with a smart irrigation controller, it gives enough water so that any time of the year the plants are not in stress.
Where can I get that?
You can go on our website. You can find information about the rebate programs, but the controllers themselves can be bought at any of the local hardware stores.
Hey, Dan, you mentioned that people should control their irrigation. Well, sometimes when I'm on the air here at the station and there's a rainstorm coming, I ask listeners just go and turn off their sprinkler systems until after the rain, 4 or 5 days after it's rained. You can turn them back on. How much water can we save by doing that?
It's hard to say just based on irrigation, but most of the irrigation demands around here are about 2.5 to 3 feet of water applied over an annual basis. So if you're getting that inch of rain, then that's an inch of rain, an inch of water you don't need to irrigate. And you can save 60% of the water most people use at their houses is for irrigation. So it's the biggest chunk of water that you're using at the house. So if you turn off your sprinklers like you recommend, and we thank you for that message out there because that's important. It's important to get a reminder out to folks to turn off their sprinklers when it does rain. But you can save money on your bill, and you can save water and help the environment. And you don't have that extra runoff too, which applies well. You asked a question earlier about the link between runoff and us. Storm runoff, we don't have a whole lot of control over, but the non-storm flows, if you cut back on your irrigation, there's less non-storm flows going out to the ocean, out to the beaches, and it's better for the environment. So you're saving money, you're saving water for conservation purposes, and you're helping the environment.
Dan, earlier you mentioned that we try to recycle water through wetlands. Where do we have any wetlands here in our area?
We have constructed wetlands still. We have we've collected urban runoff in Oso Creek since 1979. So if you were to hike up Oso Creek from Oso Parkway north into Mission Viejo, those are all wetlands up in there. It's not a channelized creek up there. It's a native creek. And there's wetlands in there. In Ladera Ranch, the Orno Creek system, there's a constructed wetlands that takes all the low flows and runs them through, and then there's basins that have constructed wetlands in them. And Dawn is working on a project now to build a new one in south of Coto de Caza in what's called Cañada Gubernadora.
Has there been any discussion of restoring wetlands there at Doheny at Dana Point?
There's always discussions about it. There's a lot of planning going on. Corps of Engineers have been doing planning. We're a member of the San Juan Basin Authority, which is looking at the groundwater management, and there's not a lot of wetlands left down there, as you noted, because of the channelized creek in there. And so you have to, in that case, because of the growth over the years, it's a balance of how much the wetlands can affect the ability to move the stormwater out so you don't cause flooding.
Is there any danger that we could run out of water?
This year, looking at some of the numbers from back in March, we had a snowpack that was about half of its annual average, and that snowpack usually provides about a third of the water in California. DWR reduced the amount of water. DWR is Department of Water Resources. They annually control the water from Northern California into the California aqueduct, and they reduced the supply from 35% to or to 35% from 40% in March. And so there's always a chance in California that we can have drought and have reduced flows. Two out of the last 3 years we were under reduced flows. And this year we've been 100%, but in the 2 previous years we were at 80% of flows. And so there is always a chance, and districts like ours are looking for water reliability opportunities. We've been involved in the Cadiz project, which is developing groundwater supplies out of San Bernardino County. We've certified an EIR to do that work, and we are working on agreements now and the engineering design, pursuing that. We do have some legal challenges to the EIR that we're addressing. We've been working with 2 different groups that are looking at ocean desal in Orange County. One's called the Poseidon-Huntington Beach Project, which has 1 permit left to get, and that would produce a plan right now of up to 50 million gallons a day. A lot of the agencies are looking at how much water they would take and what kind of commitments they want out of that. We're one of the agencies that are looking at committing to take water from that project. There's another desal project called the South Orange County Coastal Ocean Desalt Project. They've done a lot of work in conjunction with the San Juan Basin Authority to model the effects of doing beach wells down there, and we're at a point where we're evaluating the viability of that project in comparison to some other opportunities we have in the San Juan Basin itself.
Dan, what is a beach well?
A beach well is a concept. Ocean desal generally uses open ocean intakes, and so there's always a concern of balancing how much water you're pulling in versus entrainment of microscopic plankton and larger critters. Beach wells are a concept of drilling a slant well that goes out underneath the ocean, and you pump the water through the sand to get it in, so then you're using the sand to filter. It's a novel concept that being evaluated, hasn't been proven up yet, but we're looking at it as a technology.
I dare ask, when we're in a drought situation, does this mean water bills will go up?
The next group of water is going to be more expensive than the current water, and so we're balancing water reliability with cost at all times. We don't want to, in the droughts during the early 90s, you saw a lot of agencies asking people to cut back, and then in response they raised their bills as a reward for cutting back on water. You want to balance the fixed cost of your operation so that the variable cost of water doesn't impact those fixed costs. But any water reliability project that we're going into right now is likely going to be more expensive than the current sources of water.
Dan, and the cost being the bottom line really when it comes to people and their water, is there, I understand that in Bermuda they have very little water, very little rain, and they collect rain on an on-site basis into cisterns. Is that something that's viable that people can do here in Southern California?
There's the difference between Bermuda and Southern California is the consistency of the rainfall. You can do it in Southern California, but if you think in terms of Orange County, we generally average 13 inches of rain. But if you take out the El Nino wet years, the mean is really about 8 inches of rain, and it comes in maybe 6 storms a year. And so your cistern, you're not going to use it for drinking water, just from a water quality point of view and perspective. Most home folks aren't going to have a treatment system, so you're going to use it for irrigation. So you're going to fill your cistern up with a rain event in December, but you're not going to need to use that water. And so unless you get a dry spell that you can use that water, you're going to get another rain event and your cistern's already going to be full. So The problem with Southern California has always been that there's adequate water to serve our needs that comes from the rainfall. It's just there's no place big enough to store it when it does come, because it comes quickly and goes away. So,
in case you just joined us, you are listening to Collage, a weekly public affairs show on FM 88.5 KSBR. I'm Dawn Kamber. Water is a precious resource which many people may take for granted, but to get water to South County, water travels through pipes hundreds of miles from the Colorado River and Northern California. It goes through treatment plants to ensure high quality of drinking water, and it costs less than a penny a gallon. May is Water Awareness Month. Our guests are from the Santa Margarita Water District. We have General Manager Dan Ferons, Chief Engineer Don Bunts, and joining us is KSBR Air Talent Garrison West. Well, Don, share with us some of the projects you're involved with to preserve water.
One of them, as Dan mentioned, is the Gubernadora Basin, where it's a multi-use basin that's being built at the south end of Coto de Caza. The intent is to catch the runoff that happens, referred to often as nuisance runoff, overwatering, just small rain events, capture that in basins, and then recycle that in the irrigation systems. When this is completed at the end of the year, it should be able to provide roughly 60% of the irrigation demands in Coto de Caza. One of the nice things about that project is the district a few years ago submitted on an application, and the state is providing 50% of the funds for that project, so it saves the ratepayers money on the development of this. Some other projects are out at the wastewater treatment plant, expanding the recycled water use to, again, serve some of the new demands that are anticipated here in the short term for supplying their irrigation, again, reducing the demand on the imported water supplies.
When it comes to treatment of water that is safe for us to drink, share with us that process.
Currently, the district does not have any water treatment facilities on the drinking water side, but in generalities, it's basically sedimentation and then disinfection of that water. So anything that's in the water, we try to get to settle out so that it's a pure, clean water, and then post of that is provide disinfection so that there's no potential for passing on illnesses.
Now, what's in our drinking water? Are there any minerals that we need to be aware of?
There's all sorts of minerals, and a lot of them are good for you. You cannot drink water that doesn't have minerals in it. You wouldn't want to drink distilled water, say. So there is what they call total dissolved solids, TDS, which is a measure of salinity and such. And depending on the source, there's different components that can make up that water.
Is there fluoride in the water?
Yes, there is. That gets added at the treatment plants.
What is the difference between bottled water and water that comes out of the tap?
One of the big differences is bottled water isn't regulated at all. The water that comes out of the tap goes through extensive monitoring and testing to ensure its quality and safety. As we said at the beginning of the show, that water costs a penny a gallon. Water in a bottle, if you go to a mini mart and you're paying for a 16-ounce bottle, can cost you $1.39, and it doesn't have the regulatory scrutiny that our supply does.
The big difference between domestic water and bottled water is that bottled water is treated under the Food and Drug Administration, so it's regulated much as the soda industry is, whereas domestic water is treated under the Department of Health Services.
Rancho Mission Viejo, are you supplying their water?
For the new development called the Ranch Plan, and in particular the newest phase, which is the village in Sendero, yes, we are the water supplier. We did a water supply assessment in 2003, I think it was, that looked at where we could get water from it, and realizing that we did not want new development to impact existing customers, Rancho Mission Viejo and the district entered into an agreement, and we purchased water that's in storage in Cucamonga, in Rancho Cucamonga, for its emergency supply. So essentially they've gone out and acquired 150% of their demand, so that if there is a cutback, new development isn't impacting existing homeowners.
And I understand you look far into the future of water needs.
We water folks plan well out in advance, and you have to because of the intensive projects that you have to build. It takes a long time to put together a project. Just last year we completed the Upper Chiquita Reservoir, and if you look back when the original planning was done, it had a life cycle of 15 to 20 years to really analyze, put it together, and understand who can participate, what you can afford, and how you can build it, and where you can build it. And so it does take a long time to plan these projects out and bring them to fruition.
Do you look further in the future than home builders?
We work closely with the home builders, and it's really the landowners, not so much the home builders. The home builders kind of come into the process fairly late, but the major landowners in the districts have to work closely together to plan ahead what's going to go on. So over the years, since the 1970s, we've had a variety of master plans that looked at build out of the district, and those plans have changed dramatically from what they looked at in the 70s, and there's a lot more open space, there's a lot less development that was planned back then. But we definitely look far out and ahead because of anticipating if you're going to have to build a pipeline from Yorba Linda to Ladera Ranch, you don't want to have to go build another pipeline from Yorba Linda to Sendero. You want to make sure the first pipeline's big enough to serve everybody.
And since people are aware of the need to conserve water, are you finding that more people are putting drought-tolerant plants in their homes?
You're seeing the trend. The lots are smaller. There's a lot more centralized park areas for the grass. We still have a lot more we can do. A lot of folks still like having a lawn and having grass out there, but you do see the builders and the landscape architects going towards more drought, California-friendly plantings, and we're trying to emphasize that if you have an area that you're not walking on, that you're not playing on, then it doesn't really need to be grass. If it's an area that nobody ever goes on except for the guy who's mowing the lawn, then please consider using some other type of vegetation in there. There's a lot of very attractive plants out there that are drought tolerant. You can save yourself costs for maintenance on those, costs for water, and you do a lot for the environment and conservation.
Are you completely supported by consumers' bills?
Our operations, so the water and getting the water and collecting it and sewage and all that we do have a component of our costs that's in the tax bills to pay for infrastructure and capital costs. So we have sold bonds. We are authorized to sell bonds to build capital facilities. So those get included in your tax bill and are not in the operations, but the operations, the staffing and the folks are all covered by the water bills.
And how people pay water bills is different from different water districts.
Well, there's a lot of different rate structures out there. Ours, we use a tiered structure. Moulton Miguel, our neighboring district, uses a budget-based tiered structure. So they've assigned a water account for each individual home. In our case, we use an average of water bills and create our tiers that way. So most districts have gone to a tiered structure, the tiering being that your first part of your water costs less than your next and your next and your next, so that if you're in the higher tiers of water demand, you're paying more for that water because that's generally considered the more expensive water we had to go out and find for you.
So what are the most kind of wasteful ways people are using a lot more water where they're in the inefficient column?
The inefficient column, generally we're in South Orange County because we're a newer area. We have a lot of homes that have already installed low-flow devices. So if you're efficient in using the low-flow devices, if you are waiting till your dishwasher's full, waiting till your washing machine is full, not doing partial loads, if you're taking a reasonably long shower, not an excessively long shower, you're cutting back on your water. And as we talked about earlier, the biggest impact you can have is managing your irrigation system and paying attention to it, making sure that your sprinklers aren't just watering the neighbor's driveway, and that you are being efficient in application of water.
And you educate children on water. Explain.
We have a classroom program that we participate in with the Discovery Science Center up in Santa Ana for 5th grade classrooms, kindergarten through 5th grade classrooms. And we also have a Water Awareness Day every year that we bring folks in to our building and show them, try to educate everybody, have some giveaways. We have it's a fun program usually. We give tours of the district.
And you have some reservoirs.
We have a lot of reservoirs. We just built the Upper Chiquita Reservoir, which is a domestic reservoir. It's lined and covered, so it maintains its water quality. It's lined and covered, meaning it's like a large water bed. It's got a floating cover on top. We also have reservoirs for storage of recycled water, seasonal storage reservoirs. So Upper Oso Reservoir is storing recycled water during the winter for use during the summer, and we're proposing to build another one of those off Ortega Highway.
How do they operate?
The seasonal storage reservoir operates that our wastewater flows are consistent year-round. You know, people's indoor practices don't change based on winter or summer, but irrigation practices do. So during the winter, when sprinklers are off, we're pumping water from the treatment plant to the reservoir and filling it up, so that when the summer comes along and everybody turns on their sprinklers, we can pull that extra water back out. So it's a way to balance water production with water demand.
And generally every year, many times there's repairs of pipes, and you often ask residents to conserve during those times.
The Metropolitan, our major supplier of water, for the last 8 or 9 years has shut down the Deemer filtration plant in particular, and some of the importation pipelines for up to a week at a time. And during those time periods when we are on reduced flows, we are surviving off of our storage, we have asked people to be smart about their water and avoid using any excess water where we can. And we've had local events too, where a pipe is broken in a neighborhood, and we've gone around and asked the folks to turn off their sprinklers while we fix the pipelines.
And don't you work with the commercial businesses where they give you a hand when that happens?
The commercial businesses do, and in particular also the HOAs really help out quite a bit by getting their folks to turn off their sprinklers where we have domestic water use on those. And you know, plants can go, even on a hot spell, plants can go a few days without water. And so we have great cooperation. The best example we can have is we had a major pipeline broken. We reduced our demand by 40% by getting the word out to folks. And so people really do react to that emergency, and they are very cooperative and understand that it is important to watch what they're doing.
And with the last few moments that we have left, what is the word on irrigation? How often should someone water their grass?
We have on our website a chart that tells you, because it changes seasonally, so it's important to keep up to date. During the spring right now, you're looking at 2, maybe 3 times a week that you're watering your grass for 3 to 4 minutes at a time. You don't need a whole lot of water. There's a lot of moisture in the air still with the cool weather. But if you go to our website, which is www.smwd.com, there's a whole section on irrigation practices and links to other websites that can really instruct and help people figure out how to make sure that they are being efficient.
Can you give us that website again, please?
Website is www.smwd.com.
You have been listening to Collage, a weekly public affairs show on FM 88.5 KSBR. I'm Dawn Kamber, and our guests have been from the Santa Margarita Water District. We had General Manager Dan Ferons, Chief Engineer Don Bunts, and joining us has been KSBR Air Talent Garrison West. Please join us next week for another show right here on FM 88.5 KSBR.